A desperate plea. Zara stood before the council of elders, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The weight of her people's future rested upon her shoulders, a burden she had never expected to bear. The chamber, carved into the very rock of the desert mountain, seemed to close in around her as she faced the solemn faces of the elders. Elder Neron, his weathered face etched with deep lines of worry, spoke first. Zara, daughter of the sands, we have called upon you in this desperate hour because of your unwavering courage and determination. Our world teeters on the brink of collapse, and only one hope remains. Zara's throat tightened, but she managed to find her voice. I am ready to serve, Elder Neron. What must I do? The elder gestured to an ancient tapestry that hung behind the council, depicting a lush, green world so different from the barren wasteland they now inhabited. Long ago, our people thrived in a paradise, but a great cataclysm brought ruin to our civilization. The knowledge to restore our world was lost, save for one man, Cal Riken. Murmurs rippled through the chamber at the mention of the name. Cal Riken was a legend, a figure shrouded in mystery who had disappeared generations ago. Some believed he never existed at all, while others whispered that he possessed powers beyond understanding. Elder Neron continued, we believe Cal Riken still lives, somewhere in the vast desert beyond our borders. You must find him, Zara. Convince him to share the knowledge that can save us all. Zara's mind reeled at the enormity of the task. The desert was a merciless place, where few dared to venture and even fewer returned. She had heard tales of vicious sandstorms, scorching heat, and creatures that lurked beneath the dunes. Yet, as she looked around at the faces of her people, thin and weary from the unrelenting struggle to survive, she knew she could not refuse. I accept this mission, elders, Zara declared, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her heart. I will find Cal Riken and bring back the knowledge that will restore our world. The elders nodded solemnly, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. They knew the burden they were placing upon Zara, the sacrifices she would have to make. Elder Neron stepped forward, placing a gnarled hand on Zara's shoulder. May the spirits of our ancestors guide you, Zara. You carry the hopes and dreams of our people with you. Go now, and do not return until you have found Cal Riken. With a final bow to the council, Zara turned and strode from the chamber, her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Outside, the harsh sunlight of the desert greeted her, a searing reminder of the unforgiving journey that lay ahead. Zara made her way through the narrow streets of her village, the adobe buildings casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. The eyes of her people followed her as she passed, some filled with gratitude, others with pity. They all knew the weight of the task she had undertaken, and the slim chance of success. At the edge of the village, Zara paused to gather her few belongings, a weathered map, a compass, a water skin, and a pouch of dried rations. She had no illusions about the hardships she would face, but she was determined to see her mission through, no matter the cost. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Zara set out into the desert. The sand shifted beneath her feet, already warm despite the fading light. She fixed her gaze on the distant horizon, where the dunes seemed to stretch on forever, and took her first steps into the unknown. With each stride, Zara left her old life behind, embracing the mantle of her people's savior. She knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, filled with dangers she could scarcely imagine. But she also knew that she carried the hopes and dreams of her people with her, a precious cargo that would give her strength when her own faltered. As night fell and the stars emerged, cold and distant in the inky sky, Zara pressed on, guided only by the ancient map and the unwavering conviction that she would find Cal Riken and save her world from ruin. The desert stretched out before her, vast and unforgiving, but Zara walked without fear, knowing that the fate of her people rested in her hands. In the solitude of the desert night, Zara whispered a prayer to the spirits of her ancestors, asking for their guidance and protection on the long journey ahead. The wind carried her words across the dunes, a promise of hope in a world on the brink of despair. With each step, Zara moved closer to her destiny, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, for the sake of her people and the future they deserved. Echoes of the past. As the sun rose over the endless sea of sand, Zara paused to take shelter beneath a rocky outcropping. The heat was already intense, and she knew she must conserve her energy for the long journey ahead. As she sipped sparingly from her water skin, her thoughts drifted to the stories she had grown up with, tales of her people's past glory and the cataclysm that had brought their world to ruin. Long ago, her ancestors had lived in a lush, green paradise, where water flowed freely and the land was abundant with life. They had built great cities and developed advanced technologies, harnessing the power of the sun and the wind to sustain their civilization. But their prosperity was not to last. A cataclysmic event, the details of which had been lost to time, had struck their world like a hammer blow. The skies had darkened, and the earth had trembled beneath their feet. Great fissures had opened up, swallowing entire cities whole, while scorching winds had swept across the land, turning the once verdant fields to ash. In the chaos that followed, the survivors had struggled to rebuild, but the knowledge that had once sustained them was lost. The great libraries and archives, repositories of centuries of wisdom, had been destroyed, and the scholars and scientists who had kept the flame of knowledge alive had perished. As the generations passed, the survivors adapted to their new, harsh reality. They learned to extract what little moisture they could from the air and to cultivate the hardy plants that clung to life in the barren soil. But even as they adapted, they never forgot the stories of their past, the tales of the green world that had once been their home. Central to these stories was the legend of Cal Riken, a man who had appeared in the aftermath of the cataclysm, bearing knowledge that could restore their world to its former glory. Some said he was a scientist, others a sorcerer, but all agreed that he possessed powers beyond the understanding of ordinary mortals. For a time, Cal Riken had worked tirelessly to share his knowledge with the survivors, teaching them the secrets of advanced agriculture, water purification, and energy production. But as the years passed, he had grown increasingly reclusive, withdrawing from the people he had once sought to help. Eventually, Cal Riken had disappeared entirely, vanishing into the vast desert beyond the borders of their small settlement. Some said he had grown disillusioned with the survivors' inability to grasp the full extent of his knowledge, while others whispered that he had been driven mad by the weight of his own genius. As Zara sat beneath the outcropping, lost in thought, a sudden energy surge from her scanner jolted her back to the present. The device, a relic of her people's past technological prowess, had detected an anomaly in the distance, a faint trace of the same energy signature that had been recorded in the ancient ruins near her village. Intrigued, Zara set out across the dunes, following the scanner's insistent beeping. As she walked, the sun beat down upon her, and the sand shifted treacherously beneath her feet, but she pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that overshadowed her physical discomfort. Hours passed, and the scanner's signal grew stronger, guiding Zara to a series of low, rocky hills that rose up from the desert floor. As she climbed, the wind whipped at her clothing and stung her eyes, but she barely noticed, her attention fixed on the device in her hand. At last, she reached the top of the hill and found herself standing at the edge of a vast crater, its edges worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand. In the center of the crater, half buried beneath the dunes, lay the ruins of an ancient structure, its walls crumbling and its once proud towers reduced to rubble. Zara's heart raced as she picked her way down the steep slope, the scanner's beeping growing more insistent with each step. As she drew closer to the ruins, she began to make out the faint traces of intricate carvings on the weathered stone, symbols and glyphs that she had never seen before. With trembling hands, Zara reached out to touch the ancient walls, feeling the rough stone beneath her fingers. As she did so, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, and she stumbled, her vision blurring at the edges. When the dizziness passed, Zara found herself standing in a different place entirely, a vast chamber filled with strange machinery in glowing screens. The air was cool and dry, and the only sound was the faint hum of the equipment. As Zara looked around in wonder, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and slender, with eyes that glowed an unearthly blue. The figure spoke, its voice echoing in the stillness of the chamber. "Welcome, Zara, daughter of the sands," the figure said. "You have come seeking knowledge, but be warned, the truth you seek may be more than you can bear." Zara's heart hammered in her chest as she faced the figure, her mind reeling with questions. Who was this strange being, and how did it know her name? What secrets lay hidden in this ancient place, and what price would she have to pay to uncover them? As the figure stepped forward, its features hidden beneath a shimmering veil, Zara knew that her journey was far from over. The echoes of the past had led her to this moment, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and the fate of her people hung in the balance. The Oasis of Hope. Zara followed the enigmatic figure deeper into the ancient structure, her mind reeling with questions. The cool air and soft glow of the machinery were a stark contrast to the harsh desert outside, and Zara found herself wondering how such a place could have survived the cataclysm that had devastated her world. As they walked, the figure spoke, its voice low and melodic. "I am Tyan, once the apprentice of Cal Riken. Like you, I sought him out, hoping to learn the secrets that could save our people. But the knowledge he possessed was vast and complex, and I fear I only scratched the surface before he disappeared." Zara's heart leaped at the mention of Cal Riken. "So he was real? And you knew him?" Tyan nodded. "He was real, and he was brilliant. But he was also haunted by the weight of his own knowledge, and the burden of the choices he had made. In the end, I believe that burden became too much for him to bear." As they emerged into a vast chamber, Zara gasped at the sight before her. In the center of the room, a shimmering pool of water rippled gently, its surface reflecting the soft light that emanated from the walls. Around the pool, lush vegetation grew, fed by the moisture that rose from the water's surface. "This is the heart of the oasis," Tyan said, gesturing to the pool. "It is sustained by an ancient technology that Cal Riken himself designed, drawing moisture from deep beneath the ground and purifying it for our use. Without it, I would not have survived these long years in the desert." Zara approached the pool, marveling at the clear, cool water. She had never seen so much water in one place before, and the sight of it filled her with a sense of hope and wonder. As she knelt to drink, Tyan spoke again. "Cal Riken believed that the key to restoring our world lay in understanding the technology of the ancients, and in harnessing the power of the natural world. He spent years studying the ruins that dot the desert, piecing together the fragments of lost knowledge." Zara looked up, her eyes wide. "And did he succeed? Did he find a way to restore our world?" Tyan's expression grew somber. "I believe he did, but the knowledge came at a great cost. Cal Riken was changed by what he learned, and in the end, he could no longer bear the weight of it. He left me with only a fraction of what he knew, and disappeared into the desert, never to be seen again." Zara's heart sank, but she refused to give up hope. "But if he found a way, then there must be a chance. We have to keep searching, keep trying to understand what he learned." Tyan nodded. "You are right, Zara. And that is why I have remained here, in this oasis, studying the technology that Cal Riken left behind. I believe that somewhere, hidden within these ancient machines, lies the key to our salvation." For the next several days, Zara and Tyan worked tirelessly, poring over the ancient texts and diagrams that Cal Riken had left behind. Zara's mind reeled with the complexity of the knowledge she was absorbing, but she refused to give up, driven by the hope that she could find a way to save her people. As they worked, Tyan shared stories of his time with Cal Riken, painting a picture of a brilliant but troubled man, consumed by his quest for knowledge. He spoke of the wonders that Cal Riken had discovered, of the incredible technologies he had developed, and of the terrible price he had paid for his obsession. Zara listened intently, absorbing every detail, every scrap of information that might help her in her own quest. And as the days turned into weeks, she began to feel a growing sense of certainty that they were on the right path, that the answers they sought were within their grasp. But even as they made progress, Zara could sense a growing unease in Tyan. He seemed haunted by memories of his time with Cal Riken, and at times, Zara caught him staring into the distance, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. One evening, as they sat by the shimmering pool, Tyan finally spoke of what was troubling him. "I fear that I may have led Calrican astray," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "In my eagerness to learn, I may have pushed him too hard, encouraged him to delve too deeply into the secrets of the ancients. And in the end, that knowledge consumed him, driving him to the brink of madness." Zara placed a hand on Tyan's shoulder, her heart aching for the old man. "You cannot blame yourself, Tyan. Calrican made his own choices, and we cannot know what would have happened if you had not been there to guide him." Tyan smiled sadly. "Perhaps you are right, Zara. But I cannot help but feel that I bear some responsibility for what happened to him. And now, as I watch you follow in his footsteps, I fear that the same fate may await you." Zara's heart clenched at Tyan's words, but she pushed the fear aside. "I have to try, Tyan. My people are counting on me, and I cannot let them down. Whatever the cost, I must find a way to restore our world." Tyan nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know, Zara. And I will do everything in my power to help you. But promise me one thing: if the burden becomes too great, if you feel yourself slipping into the same darkness that claimed Calrican, you must turn back. Your life, and the lives of your people, are too precious to be lost to this quest." Zara promised, her heart heavy with the weight of the task that lay ahead. But even as she spoke the words, she knew that she would not turn back, no matter the cost. The fate of her world hung in the balance, and she would see her mission through to the end, whatever the consequences might be. Into the storm. As Zara and Tyan emerged from the ancient structure, the sky above them had darkened, and the air was heavy with the promise of a coming storm. The wind whipped at their clothes and stung their eyes, carrying with it the scent of ozone and the distant rumble of thunder. "We must find shelter," Tyan shouted over the howling wind. "Sandstorms in these parts can be deadly, and we cannot risk being caught out in the open." Zara nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of refuge. In the distance, she spotted a series of low, rocky hills, their slopes pockmarked with dark openings that promised shelter from the raging storm. Together, they fought their way across the shifting sands, the wind tearing at their clothes and threatening to knock them off their feet. As they drew closer to the hills, Zara could see that the openings were not mere caves, but the entrances to a vast network of tunnels that snaked beneath the surface of the desert. With a last burst of effort, they stumbled into the shelter of the tunnels, the sudden stillness and darkness a stark contrast to the chaos outside. For a moment, they stood there, catching their breath and letting their eyes adjust to the gloom. As they ventured deeper into the tunnel system, Zara felt a growing sense of unease. The walls were carved with strange symbols and glyphs, and the air was thick with the scent of ancient dust and decay. Every now and then, she caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, as if something was lurking just beyond the reach of their flickering torchlight. Tyan, too, seemed on edge, his hand never far from the hilt of his knife. "These tunnels were not made by natural forces," he muttered, his voice echoing in the stillness. "They were carved by the ancients, for purposes we can only guess at." As they pressed on, the tunnels began to twist and turn, forming a labyrinth of passages that seemed to lead nowhere. Zara's sense of direction, honed by years of navigating the shifting sands of the desert, began to fail her, and she found herself relying more and more on Tyan's guidance. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, its walls lined with glowing crystals that cast an eerie light over the scene before them. In the center of the chamber, a towering machine pulsed with energy, its surface covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the walls. Tyan's eyes widened in recognition. "This is it," he breathed. "This is what Calrican was searching for, the key to restoring our world." But before they could approach the machine, a deep growl echoed through the chamber, and a massive creature emerged from the shadows. Its body was covered in scales the color of obsidian, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence. Zara and Tyan backed away, their weapons drawn, but the creature was too fast. With a lightning-quick movement, it lashed out with a razor-sharp claw, catching Tyan across the chest and sending him sprawling to the ground. Zara rushed to his side, her heart pounding with fear and desperation. Tyan's wound was deep, and blood was already soaking through his tattered robes. She knew that without help, he would not survive. With a last, desperate effort, Zara hauled Tyan to his feet and half-carried, half-dragged him towards one of the tunnels that branched off from the chamber. Behind them, the creature let out another roar, its footsteps shaking the ground as it gave chase. They ran, stumbling and sliding on the uneven ground, the creature's breath hot on their heels. Zara's lungs burned with the effort, and her muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to give up, refused to let Tyan die in this cold, dark place. At last, they reached a narrow crevice in the wall, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. With a final burst of strength, Zara dragged Tyan into the opening, wedging herself in behind him just as the creature's claws raked across the stone where they had been standing moments before. For a long time, they lay there, gasping for breath and listening to the creature's frustrated roars as it tried to reach them. Zara tended to Tyan's wound as best she could, using strips of cloth torn from her own robes to stem the bleeding. As the hours passed, the creature's roars grew fainter, and the rumble of the storm outside began to fade. Zara knew that they could not stay in the crevice forever, but Tyan was in no condition to travel, and she could not leave him behind. Just as despair began to set in, Zara's eyes fell upon a series of cryptic markings carved into the wall beside them. They were different from the symbols they had seen throughout the tunnels, more intricate and purposeful. With a sudden flash of insight, Zara realized that the markings were not mere decoration, but a message, left behind by the ancients for those who would come after them. Heart racing, she began to decipher the code, her mind spinning with the implications of what she was discovering. As the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, Zara let out a gasp of amazement. The markings were a map, a guide to a hidden chamber deep within the tunnels, a chamber that held the final piece of Cal Riken's great machine, the key to restoring their world. With renewed determination, Zara hauled Tyan to his feet once more, supporting his weight as they set off into the darkness, following the path laid out by the ancient map. She knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, that the creature and the tunnel's many other dangers still lurked in the shadows. But she also knew that they could not turn back, not when they were so close to the truth. The fate of her people, of their entire world, hung in the balance, and Zara would not rest until she had seen her mission through to the end. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the mountain, Zara's thoughts turned to Cal Riken, to the brilliant, troubled man who had set her on this path. She wondered what he had discovered in these ancient tunnels, what terrible knowledge had driven him to the brink of madness. But even as the questions swirled in her mind, Zara pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. The chamber was close, she could feel it in her bones, and with each step, she drew closer to the truth that would change her world forever. Revelations and Rebirth. As Zara and Tyan emerged from the narrow crevice, they found themselves in a vast, circular chamber, its walls lined with pulsing crystals that cast a soft, ethereal glow over the room. In the center of the chamber stood a towering machine, its surface covered in the same intricate markings that had guided them through the tunnels. Zara's heart raced as she approached the machine, her eyes widening in wonder and disbelief. This was it, the key to their salvation, the culmination of Cal Riken's life's work. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch the machine's surface, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols etched into the metal. As she did so, the chamber began to hum with energy, and a soft, melodic voice filled the air. "Welcome, Zara, daughter of the sands," the voice said, its tone warm and gentle. "You have come far, and endured much, to reach this place. But your journey is not yet over." Zara's eyes widened in surprise, and she glanced over at Tyan, who was leaning heavily against the wall, his face pale and drawn. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am the voice of the machine," the voice replied. "The repository of Cal Riken's knowledge, and the guardian of the truth that will restore your world." As the voice spoke, a shimmering image appeared in the air before them, a hologram of a man with piercing blue eyes and a lined, weathered face. Zara gasped in recognition, for she had seen that face before, etched into the ancient tapestries that hung in the council chambers. "Cal Riken," she breathed, her voice filled with awe and reverence. The hologram nodded, a sad smile playing across its lips. "Yes, Zara. I am Cal Riken, or rather, a memory of the man I once was. I left this message, and this machine, as a legacy for those who would come after me, a final gift to the people I tried to save." As Cal Riken spoke, the chamber around them began to shimmer and change, the walls dissolving into a vast expanse of stars and swirling galaxies. Zara and Tyan found themselves floating in the void, their bodies weightless and free. "The cataclysm that destroyed your world was not a natural disaster," Cal Riken said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "It was the result of a terrible mistake, a miscalculation by the ancients who came before us. They sought to harness the power of the stars themselves, to bend the very fabric of reality to their will. But they underestimated the forces they were dealing with, and in their hubris, they unleashed a catastrophe that nearly destroyed everything." Zara's mind reeled with the implications of Cal Riken's words. The cataclysm, the event that had shaped her people's entire history, was not some random act of nature, but the result of a terrible, arrogant mistake. But the ancients also left behind a way to undo the damage they had done, Cal Riken continued. "A machine, a construct of pure energy in matter, that could reshape reality itself. I discovered this machine, and I dedicated my life to understanding its secrets, to finding a way to use it to restore our world to its former glory." As he spoke, the stars around them began to coalesce, forming a shimmering, pulsing mass of light and energy. Zara and Tyan watched in amazement as the mass began to take shape, forming into a vast, intricate machine that dwarfed the one they had seen in the chamber. "But the machine is not without its risks," Cal Riken warned, his voice growing somber. "To activate it, to harness its power, requires a sacrifice. A life, willingly given, to fuel the machine's endless hunger. And the process of reshaping reality itself is not without its dangers. There is no guarantee of success, and the consequences of failure could be catastrophic." Zara's heart clenched at Cal Riken's words, and she glanced over at Tyan, who was watching the hologram with a look of grim determination on his face. She knew, without a doubt, what he was thinking, what he was planning to do. "No," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "I won't let you do this, Tyan. You've already given so much, suffered so much. I can't ask you to make this sacrifice." Tyan smiled sadly, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. "You don't have to ask, Zara. I am offering. Freely, and without reservation. My life, for the sake of our people, for the sake of our world. There is no greater honor, no greater purpose." Zara opened her mouth to protest, but Tyan silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "I am old, Zara. My time is short, even without this sacrifice. But you have your whole life ahead of you. A life that will be filled with purpose, with meaning. A life dedicated to rebuilding our world, to leading our people into a new age of hope and prosperity." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she listened to Tyan's words, her heart breaking at the thought of losing him, of facing the challenges ahead alone. But even through her grief, she knew that he was right. This was his choice, his final gift to their people. With a final, tender embrace, Tyan stepped away from Zara and approached the shimmering machine, his step steady and sure. As he reached out to touch its surface, the machine began to glow with an intense, blinding light, and Tyan's body began to dissolve, his essence merging with the pulsing energy of the construct. Zara watched, her heart in her throat, as the machine began to hum and vibrate, its power growing with each passing second. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the machine unleashed its energy, a wave of pure, blinding light that washed over Zara and the entire world, reshaping reality itself. When the light faded, Zara found herself standing once more in the desert, the sun beating down on her skin and the wind whipping at her hair. But the desert was no longer the barren, lifeless wasteland she had known. Instead, it was a lush, verdant paradise, filled with towering trees and crystal-clear streams, with flowers blooming in every direction and animals roaming freely across the land. Zara's heart swelled with joy and wonder as she took in the sight, tears of happiness streaming down her face. They had done it. They had restored their world, had brought life and hope back to a land that had known only death and despair. But even as she reveled in their victory, Zara's thoughts turned to Tyan, to the brave, selfless man who had given his life to make this moment possible. She knew that she would carry his memory with her always, that his sacrifice would be honored and remembered by generations to come. With a final, grateful prayer to the spirits of the ancestors, Zara turned and began the long journey back to her people, her heart filled with hope and determination. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that they had been given a second chance, a new beginning, and that together, they would build a future brighter than any they had ever known. As she walked, Zara's mind turned to the future, to the work that lay ahead. There would be cities to rebuild, knowledge to rediscover, a civilization to reshape. But she knew that they would not face these challenges alone. The spirit of Tyan, and of all those who had come before, would guide them, would lend them strength and wisdom in the days to come. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a soul alight with purpose, Zara stepped forward into the dawn of a new age, ready to lead her people into a future full of promise and hope. The desert had been reborn, and with it, the dreams of a people too long denied. And Zara knew, with a certainty that filled every fiber of her being, that they would never let those dreams fade again.